I used to have a life filled with color. Textured fabrics, mood boards, soft light spilling across my desk as I planned out clients' dream spaces. But all that faded the day my mother-in-law's health began to decline. I didn't think twice. I pressed pause on my business, closed the door on every dream I was nurturing, and stepped in where no one else would. Not because I was asked, but because I loved her. Or maybe because I thought love meant showing up, no matter how it hurt. Mrs. Alves was never easy, but illness sharpened her edge. Her words landed like slaps. Lazy, she'd say while I stirred soup after staying up all night monitoring her breathing. Ungrateful, as I recorded her medication schedule and raced to appointments Leo couldn't be bothered to attend. And Leo, he'd just shrug, tell me not to take it personally. She's old, he'd say. Don't be dramatic. But it wasn't about age. It was about respect, and I was drowning in the absence of it. Still, I showed up. Day after day, I bathed her, fed her, held her hand during moments when her body betrayed her. And every night, I cried in the dark without making a sound. I missed birthdays, friends, my work, parts of myself I don't even think I'll get back. But I kept going. Because deep down, I believed that love, real love, asks for sacrifice. So I swallowed the bitterness in silence, believing one day someone would see what I gave. There were moments I tried to speak up. I'd mention how tired I was, how much I was juggling, how it felt like I was slipping through the cracks of my own life. But Leo would just tilt his head like I was being overly sensitive. "You're choosing to do all this," he said once, as if that erased the weight, as if volunteering to carry the burden made it any lighter. I started to wonder if he ever saw me at all, not as his wife, but as a human being slowly wearing thin. Some nights, after Mrs. Alves finally fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a mug of cold tea and stare at the tiled floor. I'd trace the tiny cracks between the tiles, wishing someone would ask how I was holding up. No one ever did. It was easier, I guess, to pretend I had it all handled. I wore the role like a uniform, clean, composed, capable. But inside, I was fraying, quietly, without an audience, without applause. And yet, I never stopped. Not when her insults got worse. Not when my own needs screamed louder than her oxygen machine. I gave and gave, even when there was nothing left to give. I told myself it mattered, that this kind of quiet devotion would mean something, someday. Maybe not to her, maybe not even to Leo, but to someone, somewhere. Because I wasn't doing this out of obligation. I was doing it out of love. I remember once, she looked at me, really looked, and for a second, her eyes softened. It passed quickly, replaced by the usual coldness, but I held on to it longer than I should have. Maybe it was foolish, but I needed to believe that some part of her knew, that some small corner of her heart recognized what I was sacrificing. It's strange how we cling to crumbs when we're starving for kindness. I learned to survive off almost nothing. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was the loneliness. The way everyone assumed I was strong enough to carry it all without ever asking what it was doing to me. I missed who I used to be, someone with energy, ambition, laughter in her voice. Now I was the shadow version, always one task away from collapse. And Leo? He'd scroll on his phone while I cleaned up her accidents, offering nothing but silence or sarcasm. I stopped expecting anything from him. But deep down, a small voice inside me whispered, "You matter, even if no one sees it now." And that voice is what kept me going. Through the resentment, through the tears I swallowed while folding laundry, I believed that love, the real kind, doesn't need witnesses. Still, I prayed that someday, someone would notice. Someone would understand. I swallowed bitterness in silence, believing one day someone would see what I gave. The day of the funeral was quiet, not in the peaceful way, but in the kind that presses on your chest like wet wool. I stood beside Leo as people I barely knew offered limp condolences. Some hugged me, some just nodded. I wasn't looking for a parade of gratitude. I didn't expect it. But somewhere deep in my bones, I hoped someone might say, "She was lucky to have you." No one did. The silence was louder than any eulogy. Back at the house, the smell of cologne and coffee filled the living room as relatives gathered in tight circles, whispering half-memories and stories they thought sounded kind. I kept moving, refilling cups, tossing used napkins, trying to stay useful. Until I heard Leo's voice in the hallway. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed. Anna didn't really want to help, he told his cousin. She just did it because she had to. I carried most of the weight. I froze, my hand still holding an empty tray. I waited for him to laugh it off, to say he was joking. But he didn't. And worse, they believed him. Heads nodded. Someone patted his back. That's when it hit me. He didn't just let them think that. He wanted them to. Maybe he'd been planting that seed for months. While I was breaking myself to keep his mother alive, he was rewriting the story. And in his version, I was just a reluctant extra. I slipped into the bathroom and locked the door, the tray still in my hands like some forgotten prop. My face in the mirror didn't even look like mine. I searched for something, anger, heartbreak, anything that might explain the weight in my chest. But all I felt was emptiness, a kind of hollow ache that comes when truth gets suffocated by lies. I had given years of my life, piece by piece, to a woman who barely thanked me. And now, even that story wasn't mine to tell. When I came out, Leo was laughing with his siblings, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just overheard him erasing me. And no one looked at me differently. That was the worst part. They'd already bought his version. I could feel their pity, but it wasn't for me. It was for him, the poor husband who'd carried the burden, the saint who stood by while his wife dragged her feet. I wanted to scream, to tear down every smile in that room. Instead, I poured more coffee. In that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not just in how they saw me, but in how I saw him. I'd made excuses for Leo for so long, told myself he was overwhelmed, told myself he just didn't know how to help. But now I saw it. He hadn't been blind. He'd been watching all along and letting me drown. Because it was easier to play the hero in a story where I was the villain. He buried his mother with lies, and I buried the last of my loyalty. After the guests left, I cleared the living room in silence. Crumpled napkins, half-empty plates, lipstick-stained glasses. It all felt like debris from a life I didn't recognize anymore. Leo went to bed without a word. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just silence, like I was part of the furniture being ignored again. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the flickering light from the hallway, and for the first time, I let the silence settle without rushing to fix it. I thought about all the times I bit my tongue, defended him, smoothed things over so the family wouldn't see the cracks. I had been the glue, the nurse, the cook, the shield, and now I was the ghost. He had erased me so gently, so casually, that I almost didn't notice until it was done. I was just a footnote in his version of events, the woman who had to help. As if love hadn't been the very thing that held this broken house together. But something inside me stirred. Not anger, not sadness, clarity, a quiet kind of resolve. I realized I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I didn't need to beg for anyone to see what I had given. I had lived the truth. That was enough. But it wasn't the end, not yet. Because if Leo wanted to rewrite the past, I'd make sure the truth had its own chapter. One they couldn't ignore. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I did what I've always done. I got organized. While Leo kept parading his edited version of the truth, I started building mine. Every prescription I'd picked up, every note I'd written to her doctor, every meal plan, appointment sheet, mileage record, I dug it all up. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about remembering that my reality wasn't just something I imagined. It had receipts. I found an old voice recorder buried in a kitchen drawer, the kind Leo used during college lectures. I charged it up and began listening. There it was, his voice, lazy and irritated, mocking his mother behind closed doors, saying things like, "She's your problem, Anna," or, "Don't expect me to wipe anything." I labeled the files by date, time, tone. It gave me purpose, something to do with the ache in my chest that wouldn't leave. I wasn't losing my mind, I was collecting it. At night, while he snored beside me, I filed everything away in a blue binder. I gave it a name that made my heart race. Truth, not version. And with each page I slid into a sleeve, I felt a little steadier, a little more awake. I wasn't planning some dramatic explosion, not yet. But I was laying bricks, quietly, carefully. Because the woman he erased, she was done vanishing. The house didn't change, but I did. I started seeing through things, like the way Leo only touched me when someone was watching, or how he'd leave the dishes for me even when I worked late into the night compiling records. Every little thing he didn't do now had a spotlight on it. And yet, he walked around so smug, so sure, that I was too quiet, too polite, too broken to push back. That was his first mistake. Thinking silence meant surrender. I kept collecting. Screenshots of texts, bank statements showing charges I covered without ever being reimbursed. Notes I'd written to myself in the margins of grocery lists. Call pharmacy, ask again about dosage, don't forget gloves. Tiny, invisible acts of care that no one ever saw, but they were real. I had lived them. And now they lived in that binder, my archive of sacrifice. Not for drama, for truth. And someday soon, it would speak louder than Leo ever could. Then, as if fate knew I was almost ready, Leo suggested something strange. "Let's have the family over," he said casually. "A little dinner, to reconnect." I didn't flinch, I just nodded. "Sure," I told him, my voice smooth as glass. But inside, something clicked into place. The timing, the opportunity, the stage he'd unknowingly offered me. He wanted a warm gathering. I was preparing for something colder, and far more honest. I spent the days leading up to the dinner moving like clockwork, polite, efficient, unreadable. I cooked his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I let him believe we were healing. That's what he always wanted anyway. Comfort without accountability. He had no idea I was rehearsing. Not lines, but calm. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to deliver. And every moment of care I gave him now was strategy, not affection. The night before the gathering, I sat with the binder in my lap. My fingers traced its cover like it was sacred. It held everything, not just proof, but memory. Evidence of love that had been twisted, used, and thrown away. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted them to see the cost. Not in raised voices, but in quiet facts, in details too sharp to ignore, the kind that make you look twice at the story you thought you knew. When I placed the binder on the hallway table the next morning, right next to the flower arrangement Leo had ordered, it felt right. Like setting two truths side by side, the image he curated and the reality I lived. He was ready for closure, but I had prepared for clarity. One dinner, one room full of people, and finally, one truth, my truth, stepping fully into the light. They arrived just before sunset, arms full of wine bottles and side dishes, their voices loud with laughter and habit. The kind of noise that fills a house without really touching it. I moved between greetings with a soft smile, thanking them, guiding them to the living room, keeping everything warm and effortless. No one noticed my hands trembling. No one questioned the binder tucked beneath the edge of the sideboard. They didn't come for the truth. They came for Leo's narrative, the one they'd already swallowed whole. Dinner was smooth, exactly how he liked it. Roast chicken, soft jazz in the background, the clinking of silverware over surface-level stories. I answered their questions about work and how I'd been managing, while Leo basked in the attention. He played gracious host, cracking jokes, topping off wine glasses, brushing my back like we were still close. I nodded, laughed in the right places, played my part. Because timing matters, and the truth deserves a proper entrance. When dessert was served and the laughter hit its peak, I stood. Calm, still, the kind of quiet that carries weight. "There's something I need to say," I told them, my voice steady. "And it won't take long." Leo glanced up mid-bite, his fork halfway to his mouth. I didn't wait for permission. I walked to the table and opened the binder. The room shifted. The air changed. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth. I told them about the nights, the real ones. The ones where I sat on the floor outside her door, listening to her breathe, afraid she wouldn't make it to morning. I told them about the meals I pured, the medications I fought insurance for, the weeks I went without a single moment to myself. I described how she'd call me names, how Leo would laugh or say, "Ignore her, she's old," and then vanish into another room. I didn't embellish, I didn't dramatize, I just told them what happened. Then I passed the evidence around. One by one, I handed out copies, appointment logs, receipts, transcriptions of his voice calling her a burden, saying I liked playing the martyr. No one reached for the wine anymore. Some read with furrowed brows, some didn't read at all. I watched their faces, the tightening jaws, the widening eyes, the shift from polite disbelief to uncomfortable recognition. Leo tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. Calm, measured. "You lied for comfort," I said. "I tell the truth for freedom." He muttered something about how I was twisting things, taking them out of context. But it was too late. The room had changed. The stories he'd told couldn't compete with the silence that followed. You can't argue with detail. You can't overwrite ink with noise. I looked at each of them. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. And when I sat back down, it was the first time I'd taken a seat at that table without carrying someone else's weight on my back. No one touched their forks after that. The plates sat full, steam curling up into the tension that now hung heavy in the room. His sister looked down, her face pale. One cousin cleared his throat and asked if I needed help cleaning up, the first time any of them had ever offered. Leo just sat there, staring at the binder like it had betrayed him. But it hadn't. It had only exposed what he'd tried to keep hidden behind charm and omission. The truth doesn't need anger to cut deep. I didn't want them to pity me. That wasn't the goal. I wanted them to know that I had given everything, not for applause, but because it's what love had asked of me. And when no one saw, I kept giving anyway. They didn't need to love me for it. They didn't even need to believe me. But they couldn't unsee the facts laid bare on that table. I had been small for too long. That night, I took up my full space. As I cleared the dishes, no one tried to stop me. No one dared say, "Let me help," or "You shouldn't have done this." Their silence said enough. For once, it wasn't cold. It wasn't dismissive. It was the silence of reckoning. The room once filled with pity, now overflowed with shame. And none of it was mine. I filed for divorce the following Tuesday. No big fight, no dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet signature on a document that said, "Enough." Leo didn't even argue. He looked at the papers like they were confusing, like he hadn't seen it coming. But I think, deep down, he had. He always counted on my silence. What he didn't count on was what I'd built inside it. A quiet backbone, made of every moment I chose myself and no one noticed. Moving out wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I didn't cry when I packed. I didn't take much. Just my essentials, my design tools, and the binder. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. I found a small apartment above a cafe. The ceilings were low, but the light poured in through the windows like forgiveness. I unpacked slowly, letting each item find its new home, like I was learning how to breathe again. It felt like waking up from a long, exhausting sleep. Within a month, I reopened my interior design business. My hands remembered what my heart had forgotten, the thrill of creating something beautiful from chaos. Clients returned, new ones came in, word spread, and with every project I reclaimed a piece of myself. I didn't talk about Leo. I didn't need to. His absence wasn't a scar. It was a cleared space, one I could finally fill with something honest, something mine. I heard through someone that Leo's family stopped coming around. No big fallout, just distance. The kind that grows when people finally see someone clearly and don't like what's looking back. His sister messaged me once, just a short text. "I'm sorry, we were wrong." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to carry their guilt too. Let them sit with it. Let it stretch across their dinners and holidays the way my silence once did. What surprised me most was how often people brought up my strength. You never raised your voice, they'd say. You just showed the truth. That stuck with me. For so long, I thought strength looked like yelling, slamming doors, demanding to be heard. But I was wrong. Sometimes strength is standing still while someone tries to erase you and refusing to vanish. I didn't fight him. I revealed him. And the echo of that truth traveled farther than I expected. Then one morning, I opened my inbox and saw something unexpected. An invitation to speak at a caregiving conference. They'd heard about what I did. Word had spread, maybe through a friend of a friend, maybe further. They wanted me to talk about the invisible weight women carry behind closed doors. At first, I almost declined. What could I possibly say that would matter to a room full of strangers? But then I remembered the binder, the silence, the years, and I said yes. Standing at that podium months later, I looked out at a sea of faces, women of all ages, some with tired eyes, others holding notebooks like lifelines. I didn't use a script. I didn't need to. I spoke from the part of me that had once been invisible. I wasn't just a daughter-in-law, I told them. I was a full human being, giving everything I had behind a closed door, while the world assumed I was doing the bare minimum. Heads nodded. Tears welled. I wasn't alone anymore. After the keynote, a woman came up to me with trembling hands. She whispered, "Thank you. You said everything I've never been allowed to say." That moment meant more to me than any apology Leo could ever offer, because finally, the truth had stretched beyond my walls. It had found others. It had freed more than just me. We stood there, not as strangers, but as witnesses to each other's quiet battles. That was the kind of closure I never knew I needed. As I walked out of that building, binder still in hand, I felt something lift. Not bitterness, not revenge, just release. I had given years of my life out of love, and he had turned it into obligation. But now, the story belonged to me again. Fully. Honestly. And the best part? I owed him nothing.